Hi, everyone. My name is Jim Newton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Blueprint magazine. Our fall issue on housing and homelessness is providing, I hope, the starting point for tonight's conversation. It's my great pleasure to be able to welcome all of you this evening, to be able to introduce some of the participants tonight, and to join in the conversation that we're about to have. Just as a note, an important goal of Blueprint is to bring together policymakers and researchers and other thoughtful people from around the city and county on the most pressing issues of the day. Tonight's conversation is a real big piece of that, and I'm delighted that all of you took the time to be here, so thank you. We're going to turn to the problems of homelessness in our panel in just a minute, but first I get to welcome two people who played a really special role on this issue and in this issue of Blueprint. Marcia Chu of Wells Fargo Bank and County Supervisor Mark Ridley-Thomas. First, I'll start with Marcia, who will step up here in just a minute. Marcia Chu is here tonight representing Wells Fargo, where she's the Vice President of Community Development. She brings to that job, and you'll see some of this in the bios, by the way, that are on your seats. She brings to that job a deep background in community affairs and conflict resolution, both in Los Angeles and during her time with the city of Austin, Texas. In her various capacities, she has worked with police and nightclub owners, day laborers, and homeowners. She's patched together communities reeling from crisis, and she's helped neighborhoods imagine and pursue more constructive futures. She's also, notably, an alumnus of UCLA, and I'm particularly pleased to say that she's been one of Blueprint's most enthusiastic champions ever since we published our first issue in 2015. Thanks to Marcia, Wells Fargo provided the support that made possible the fall 2018 issue, the one that you have on tonight, the one that addresses housing and homelessness. So I'm very grateful to Marcia and to Wells Fargo for their support, and I'm very happy to introduce her to you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcia Chu.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome you. I'm so glad that you're here to join this very important conversation on housing. We're all too familiar with the statistics on homelessness and our affordability crisis in our region. And we all experience the devastating manifestations daily on our streets. So Wells Fargo believes in supporting people and organizations who are dedicated to solving problems. So be it constructing affordable units for special needs populations, advocating for smart public policy, or helping to close the gap in wealth and equity, Wells Fargo has committed $500 million annually to strategic philanthropy. Our local market priorities are affordable housing, economic development, education, and human services, with an intentional call to action addressing the epidemic of homelessness. So it made perfect sense to work with Jim to sponsor this particular issue. And we're so proud to join in partnership with you. So I want to start by thanking Jim Newton and his Blueprint team for always putting out such a beautiful magazine. I love the heft of it, the look. It's a very stylish and attractive journal. I read every issue cover to cover because I just really admire the multifaceted and in-depth look at one topic. Past issues have highlighted immigration, water, public safety, and now housing. So thank you, Jim, for always putting out this beautiful product that makes me so proud. And I'd also like to thank Dean Gary Segura and our terrific UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs staff and faculty. I want to thank you for your valuable research and scholarship around the most pressing issues that we face, and for the educational conferences. And most importantly, I want to thank the leadership at Luskin for training future leaders who are oriented towards problem solving. And always a special gratitude to Rini and Meyer Luskin for their vision and their support and their enthusiastic engagement at UCLA. So again, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being concerned, engaged citizens. And I think this panel will help us gain deeper understanding and perhaps generate more solutions to address these issues of the day. Thank you.
All right, me again. Now to our star of the evening. Are you the star of the evening? Maybe you are. In 1992, I was a brand new Metro reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and Mark Ridley-Thomas was a brand new member of the Los Angeles City Council, as well as being a leader of one of the city's most significant community organizations, the 8th District Empowerment Congress. On April 29th of that year, 17 years and a day ago, the Los Angeles riots cut a swath across much of the city, and it hit the councilman's district particularly hard. Afterward, Los Angeles' confidence was in tatters, as were the grocery stores and liquor marts that burned to the ground. In short order, Police Chief Daryl Gates and Mayor Tom Bradley clashed, and the two of them were gone, and a new generation of leaders was thrown into the bewildering and exceedingly difficult period of recovery and repair. Mark Ridley-Thomas rose to that occasion. I grew to appreciate the councilman in those years, to rely on his wisdom and his political acumen and his sense of humor, especially his sense of humor. He may or may not recall it, but there was one time where he caught me in the middle of doing an impression of him and forgave me for it. I appreciate that. He has to leave early tonight, so I'll do it after he goes. In the decades since, Mark Ridley-Thomas has occupied one important office after another, and he comes to us tonight as supervisor for Los Angeles' 2nd District, the county supervisor, a position of immense importance and one with responsibility for many of the social services that impact housing and homelessness. This is a big and complicated region. Those are particularly difficult tasks. I know of no one who's more committed to grappling with them than Supervisor Ridley-Thomas. It's been my pleasure to know him for more than 25 years, and it's my pleasure to introduce him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Supervisor Mark Ridley-Thomas.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Why don't we give Jim Newton another big round of applause for his work and his leadership, and for 25 years of enduring a relationship with me. It is the case that we met in our respective venues and collaborated on a number of matters important to the civic life of Los Angeles, and that conversation continues until this very moment. So I'm grateful to be here tonight for a bit of time just to share a few insights with you. I think it's fair to say when Blueprint was started, when it began in 2015, Jim said the following: Blueprint's job is to explain academic work, suggest ideas for change, and engage readers and leaders in a conversation about how to tackle the most pressing problems of this region. And I wish to assert tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that homelessness is the most pressing problem in this region. It is defined in terms of a moral crisis, I believe, and I further believe that it will define our civic legacy in the eyes of future generations. And so it seems to me that tonight's conversation is very timely. It's significant for a host of reasons, and we have to resolve that we will stay focused, that we will stay engaged, and that we will not let the quality of life in the city of Los Angeles, the region we call Los Angeles, be defined by this most incredible phenomenon that we call homelessness. Jim, I think it's fair to say that we were inattentive to this matter, significantly related to issues that grabbed us, not the least of which was the civil unrest. And these issues come quickly, sometimes unpredictably, but they do not leave quickly. They stay a while and they define the priorities of the day. And certainly that was the case in 1992, and then an earthquake came in 1994, and that shifted the policy agenda in a number of other ways. And all during that time, thank you very much. Another earthquake happening. We're here for you. Don't worry about it. You get a promotion for that. But all during that time, this issue of homelessness kept moving. The poverty index kept expanding. And fast forward to where we are today, we are confronted with conditions in which people live that are virtually unspeakable. And so as we think about downtown Los Angeles, a lot of change began with redevelopment in the Staples Center, and marvelous, extraordinary progress has been made. When you think about downtown, the skyline provides a stark illustration of the income and gap disparities in this region. Mere steps away from the dozens of cranes looming above the gleaming towers of downtown, we find Angelenos, our brothers and our sisters, in utter squalor. Position yourself at 7th and Figueroa and just look around. All kinds of new buildings here that were not here just 5, certainly not here 10 years ago. But if you just walk 7 blocks east on that same street, 7th, and you'll find yourself in conditions that are jarring to the sensibilities. And so this discordance is evident in a way that is powerful. Skid Row 20 years ago was approximately 50% of the homeless population in the region. It's now 10% roughly. And the phenomenon has spread far and wide throughout LA County. And it's for that reason, I believe, irrespective of political persuasion, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, any other immutable difference, that Measure H was passed because people understood that something needed to be done. Well, I won't belabor the point. I just simply want to say that the problem, the challenge, the issue is before us like never before anew. And if we pay attention to trends in counties around us, the data is now rolling out. Orange County, Riverside County, San Bernardino County, Ventura County, all 4 counties in Southern California. The homeless numbers are showing significant increases, uptick. And we can fairly and or safely surmise that even as we help more people to exit homelessness each year in the county of Los Angeles, this crisis continues to present itself in a very forceful way. We will not retreat. We will simply learn what we can from the new data that we anticipate getting and decide how we need to tweak our program. We need to be flexible, we need to be nimble, we need to be straight ahead in doing what we must do. That's the resolve of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors as we discuss the matter today, and we are proud of what we've accomplished. But I can tell you that we should never underestimate the force of poverty. And frankly stated, homelessness, as we define it, is the most blatant and contemporary manifestation of poverty. If I were to go back to the context of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference founded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who fought, taught, preached, and practiced nonviolence, Dr. King made it abundantly clear that poverty is a form of violence. And to the extent that that is the case, if we want to be devotees of the philosophy of nonviolence, we need to fight poverty with all our energy. Well, one of the most popular ways in which we have communicated a sense of hope for this incredible challenge is through the 44 multidisciplinary teams that go out and do this work in the homeless encampments. A nurse, a mental health clinician, a substance use counselor, a generalist outreach worker, and someone who has lived experience. They team up to connect with people on the streets and bring them home. And we've done a marvelous job in that regard, but we simply have not done enough. Why? Because of income insecurity and instability, gaps in the capacity to earn, as well as the unaffordability or the lack of affordability of housing. These issues are confronting us very, very forcefully. We thought about homelessness in terms of substance use issues. We thought about it in terms of mental health issues, and we've thought about it in those terms pretty concretely. Now we have to recognize that the issue of people's inability to maintain their decent living conditions, and you will expect to see an uptick in vehicular homelessness, which is an early clue for many of us that the problem is that people just can't afford the rent. And to the extent that that is the case, we have to come up with creative, elegant, thoughtful, imaginative solutions, and we will not stop until we get there. And so the shortage of affordable housing, big number in the county of Los Angeles, some 500,000 units short, if you can imagine that. We just have a lot of work that we have to do. But I am not inclined to be discouraged. I feel a deep sense of obligation and duty to tackle this issue, and we need to do it with a sense of urgency. It's not commonplace, therefore we shouldn't be complacent. I've often said that we can do this, and we can make this our life's work to the extent that we feel it important to be so. Our lives are defined by what is happening in this space. If our region is to prosper, it is not only a moral imperative, but it's an absolute economic imperative that all who call Los Angeles home and are able to attain their full measure of dignity, self-worth, and self-determination will essentially cause us to live in a way that we can be proud to say that we too are Angelenos. That seems to me to be some of what the Blueprint is trying to scratch at tonight, and to the extent that that is the case, I thank you for this opportunity to be here and share these thoughts with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, if I could have the members of the panel join me up here, I'll do some brief introductions as they sit down. Again, I'm going to defer to the material that you have on your chairs for the more detailed introductions, but you all join me wherever you're comfortable. As they sit down, to what looks like will be my far left, Phil Ansell represents thank you very much. Represents the County of Los Angeles here tonight. He's the director of the county's homeless initiative. Makes him really the linchpin of the county's efforts on this issue. Immediately to his right, Christina Miller represents the city of Los Angeles and Mayor Eric Garcetti, who's made this issue a priority. He, the mayor, has made this issue a priority in a way, frankly, that none of his predecessors, at least in my time, has attempted. And finally, to my immediate left, Vinit Mukhija. Vinit made the trip across town tonight from UCLA, where he's a professor of urban planning at the Luskin School of Public Affairs. He's an author and an award-winning teacher, and is, I'm happy to say, one of the researchers whose work is featured in the issue you have tonight. It was a pleasure to feature his work in our pages, and it is, of course, a pleasure to be with him tonight. So that's our panel. If I could start with a question to all of you, or each of you, and then we'll just go back and forth. We'll talk until 8:30 or so, and then we'll open it to some questions from all of you. So please be prepared to ask a question when the time comes. Maybe I'll start with you, Phil, just and work down the row. I thought it'd be useful to ask each of you to start by asking you the question, if you were trying to address homelessness in this community without any restrictions of politics or money, what's the first thing you would do to tackle this issue? You want to start? hard to imagine a world without restrictions of politics or money.
Indeed.
But run with me.
Well, the Supervisor Ridley-Thomas mentioned the challenge, the biggest challenge we face in combating homelessness is the inflow of people becoming homeless. We've been extraordinarily successful in helping people move from homelessness into permanent housing. As a homeless services system, over 27,000 individuals and family members who moved into permanent housing in the 18 months since Measure H took effect in July of 2017. But notwithstanding that, as we see on our streets, we don't see a visible decline in the number of people experiencing homelessness because people continue to become homeless at such a significant rate, primarily because of inability to pay the rent. So if I had a magic wand, unconstrained by money or rules or time, I would instantly increase the supply of affordable housing by 560,000 units so that there would be enough affordable housing for everyone who needs it.
Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I think Phil's answer is spot on. I mean, I think it's been a long time coming where people haven't always connected the fact that the homelessness crisis is a housing crisis. And I think that notion is becoming more and more apparent as we see our system get better at lifting people up once they become homeless and getting them back into housing as quickly as we can, but not seeing progress because the inflow is, the tide is too strong. And so you said with no constraints on money or politics, but you didn't say time, and Phil threw in time, because I think time and regulation is also a big part of the barriers it takes to get affordable units online quickly. We are, as a city, working very hard to kind of get out of our own way from a regulatory standpoint and stand up units quickly, because we know, I think another notion that is sort of built into the unfortunate consciousness of a lot of Angelenos is that people believe that homelessness is the choice of the person who is living on the streets. And so I think what we know is that if safe, viable, affordable, accessible housing was accessible to people living on the streets, without question, they would move inside.
Yeah, Jim, I also agree. With no lack of resources or regulatory challenges or cultural challenges in a place like LA, we would have a lot more supply of housing, and we would have probably a lot more better jobs and wages, so the demand side would also be stronger. So we'd be richer, we'd have more housing, and we'd be all better housed. But sadly, we do have tremendous constraints.
Right. So let me ask this. You've looked at this problem in many parts of the world. Are there places elsewhere in this country or outside this country where there are not homeless people? Societies that have genuinely solved this problem?
I don't think there are places without any homelessness.
Zero.
There are places with much stronger public housing programs. We don't do that anymore. We sort of do depend on Section 8 vouchers, limited amount of low-income housing tax credit housing, and other small buckets that we use very well, but we don't believe in public housing. So that is a challenge. There are other places where housing, the ways homelessness is addressed is a little more hidden. It takes the form of unpermitted housing or informal housing. And that's the example of places like Mumbai in India, where you see street homelessness, but you don't notice maybe half the city living in unpermitted housing as much as the scale suggests. But it's there. To some extent, how we have solved this issue in Los Angeles is by having hidden homelessness even more than homelessness. We have tremendous numbers of unpermitted housing. That includes housing that's unsafe. That includes housing that's a little more safer. And as Christina was saying, people need housing. They find solutions. Either it comes from the market, or it comes from the public sector side, or it comes from kind of the market, but the informal market.
Any of you could take this. What portion do we know of this area's homeless population is working? Maybe not a 9-to-5 job, but is bringing in an income, a non-government income. Do we know? And has that changed?
Well, what we know is that the percentage of people who are homeless and working as of the annual point in time count is much lower than the percentage of people who are working among those who experience homelessness over the course of a year. About twice as many people experience homelessness at some point in the course of a 12-month period as the number who are homeless at a point in time.
On a given day.
And those who have briefer episodes of homelessness, who come in and out of homelessness in the course of a year, are compared to those who remain homeless as of a point in time, are more likely to be working, less likely to suffer from mental illness, and less likely to suffer from substance abuse.
And I assume there's different requirements in terms of response to that population too than for those who are mentally ill or substance abusers.
Absolutely. I would also sort of point out in that regard, the supervisor also mentioned the prevalence of vehicular homelessness in Los Angeles County. In our last homeless count in January 2018, the last count for which we have results, there were actually more people living in cars and RVs than there were people living in tents and encampments. Tents and encampments are by far the most visible, the most visible portion of the homeless population. But when we see more people in cars and RVs and vans, that tells us that people are falling into homelessness for economic reasons, and many of people who are living in vehicles are either currently working full or part-time or were recently employed.
I'll also say, just to Phil's point, I mean, what we know about unsheltered people who are unsheltered is that they make up 3 out of 4 people who are homeless in the city. And the reason behind people living outdoors is, again, not because of choice or because the weather is nice and so people came to California to be homeless. It really is because we don't have enough indoor spaces for them to be, whether it's permanent housing, interim housing. So people are kind of left with no options, which gives us that very high number of people who are living on the streets, whether it is vehicular homelessness or in encampments or in tents. We do know that the number one driver into homelessness, again, of just a lack of affordable housing, but is economic drivers. I think sometimes our perception of people with mental health issues, we think of them as being overrepresented in the homeless population. And I just give the example, if you're walking down the street and you see a car that's just parked with maybe a mom quietly sleeping with her 2 children, and on the other side of the street you see a man yelling and screaming and maybe acting very bizarre, your attention is going to be drawn to that person, to the person who's being more disruptive. And so it really does kind of skew our idea of who makes up people who are experiencing homelessness.
One of those, I think it's safe to say, one of the common fears of homelessness is that homeless people bring danger or crime, or that they're threatening in some way. Is that not true?
I mean, I'll say what we know just from LAPD, from police statistics, is that people who are homeless, especially people who are homeless on the streets, are disproportionately the victims of crime than they are the perpetrators of crimes, which makes a lot of sense. They are very vulnerable. They are outside. They don't have a door to lock. They don't have 4 walls to protect them. And so they are much more susceptible to being victims of violent crime, theft, and we have data that substantiates that as well.
I mean, related to, Jim, this question and the last question, last week, the Luskin School released the Luskin Quality of Life Index that was organized and ran by former supervisor Zav Jaroslavsky. And I was shocked to see one of the numbers that hasn't had that much press, but a quarter of the respondents know someone in LA County that is worried about being homeless. That's the stunning scale at which we are. So, I mean, I think to some extent that also addresses the issue of the question of these are working people. It goes beyond and very everyday Angelenos for whom, beyond visibility of homelessness, it is becoming a much more likely possibility for many of us.
It certainly argues against what I suspect is a lot of people's notion that this is a sort of subculture unto itself, right? Whether it's by desire or by poverty or affliction or some combination of drugs, et cetera. If the notion is that really what's more accurate is to say that all of us or many of us are only a few steps away from it, that really does recalibrate the way we think about this issue.
I mean, I think so. And I remember talking to a colleague of mine who studies homelessness more, and I was trying to understand the mental health aspect of this. And she was very straightforward, and she said, if you spend 2 weeks out on the street, it's going to affect you.
I'll bet that's right. Yeah, right.
I mean, and so I think we overplay, we get affected by what we see, but that's the nature of being unsheltered.
I think some other populations that are emerging where the homelessness crisis is becoming more acute is really changing the face of homelessness. When we talk about college students, right, 1 out of 5 of every community college students in Los Angeles are experiencing homelessness. And also if we think about older adults, last year for the county homeless count numbers, older adults went up 22%. And so again, more and more it is just becoming more obvious that this has much more to do with an affordability crisis than it has to do with, like you said, like a lifestyle choice or, just a moral failing, right? So.
There's been an idea that's floated around out there that you may have already answered this question, but that deinstitutionalization, that going back to the 1960s and the Governor Reagan administration, sort of in collaboration with civil liberties groups, which successfully argued that we shouldn't institutionalize a certain number of mentally ill people, and that resulted in putting many of them on the street, and that was responsible for a big surge in homelessness. This sounds like something else, and therefore maybe argues against the notion that we should have more tools for institutionalizing.
Well, I think we want to be cautious here.
Sure. No, that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
I mean, homelessness is a very complex phenomenon, both in terms of the causes and the characteristics of people experiencing homelessness. So there is a significant minority of people in the neighborhood of 30% who are experiencing homelessness at a point in time, a lesser percentage over the course of those who experience homelessness over the course of a year, because people with mental illness are more likely to experience longer term homelessness. But 30% is still 30% of a number that's over 50,000. So that is definitely a population that needs our attention and that disproportionately needs a higher level of service for a longer period of time. And permanent supportive housing, which is the evidence-based practice for people experiencing long-term homelessness with a disability, is the best solution for a significant subset of people who are experiencing homelessness suffering from severe mental illness. Not the depression or anxiety that most of us in the room would likely experience if we were trying to survive on the sidewalk, but rather schizophrenia, for example, or other severe and persistent mental illness. So that is definitely part of the picture. And there's also an important intersection with the criminal justice system, both because of people whose behavior is criminalized because they're homeless, and people who suffer from mental illness and are homeless and engage in criminal behavior. And our Board of Supervisors has recognized that in supporting diversion from the criminal justice system for people with mental illness, and for envisioning a new approach to a replacement facility that's really focused on treatment for people at the intersection of mental illness and the criminal justice system. So though it is absolutely the case that the flow of people into homelessness is predominantly due to economic reasons of the people who are currently homeless, and particularly those who have been homeless for a long time. There is a significant minority that do suffer from mental illness.
And would it be useful, and maybe just as importantly, maybe more importantly, humane, for authorities, I guess law enforcement, to have more tools to be able to detain people who are in that population, that 30% population that may need help but otherwise not seek it?
So there is a state law, Welfare and Institutions Code Section 5150, that authorizes a 72-hour hold for people who are a risk to themselves or others. And then that can be extended under certain circumstances. Our Board of Supervisors has sponsored legislation to expand the definition of gravely disabled so that a broader group of people suffering from mental illness would be subject to an involuntary hold and involuntary treatment. I think it's important to realize that this is a continuum, and these are very challenging issues around balancing individual and community well-being with privacy and rights to self-determination. So it's not an all or nothing question, but our board is supporting a modest move along that continuum that would somewhat expand the population of people suffering from mental illness who would be subject to involuntary treatment.
Yeah, I think Phil's point is spot on. I mean, I think, I worked on the front lines, so to speak, for about 8 years in the private nonprofit world. My background's in mental health, and worked and oversaw outreach teams. And I think there is a hunger for more tools for frontline staff who might be outreaching to someone who, clearly needs some higher level of intervention, but just doesn't meet the criteria of what it would take to put them on a 5150 hold, and are watching people decompensate or deteriorate on the streets because maybe of a physical illness, but because of their mental health issues are just, they're not taking their medication, they're refusing services, or they're refusing some sort of medical intervention. And I think when we see people decompensate at that rate, it can be, it can be really tough for frontline workers who know someone might need assistance and need a deeper level of care, but the person doesn't have their own ability to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a question, Vinit. We talked about this a little beforehand, so I've cheated a little bit. But looking internationally, as you have, so much homelessness is the just intergenerational, ingrained poverty from which there seems no plausible escape generation to generation. Here, and feel free to correct that, here, it's in some sense a measure of affluence, right, that we're suffering, in the sense that rising property values and rising apartment rentals, et cetera, costs have put a certain number of people who otherwise would have a place to live out of the reach of a place to live. That seems to suggest a totally different kind of response societally. I'm just curious to juxtapose the sort of problem, if you would juxtapose the problems of that are created by affluence in this society, LA, this region, versus the kinds of problems that you see overseas, and how those may lend themselves to different solutions.
I mean, I think one of the benefits we of course have is affluence provides us with resources, and we can dream of having permanent supportive housing for thousands of people. I mean, we should do that. But that takes time. That takes significant amount of time. So I think we have to also be prepared to recognize that there are people who will take time to get housed, and we have to address their living conditions as well. So that, to me, means a lot more willingness to understand and recognize that people are going to stay homeless for a while. What kind of public infrastructure can we improve? That's restrooms, that's storage spaces, that's parking lots that can provide places for cars to be there. So those are not ideal solutions, but that has to be a change here that we need to accept. I think places like and I mentioned the unpermitted housing. That has been a part of LA for decades now. Before, you said you joined in 92, 1987, LA Times did this great survey of garages across LA County and concluded 42,000 were unpermitted. And it said, well, we have to do something about improving conditions in that. 97, Supervisor Thomas was on the LA City Council and led the garage housing task force that recognized that, and it was triggered by, I believe, 7 deaths that took place in garage housing across the city. And there was a recognition that this is here. We can either ignore it, or we can be pushed into a situation where we have more fires and we have to shut it down, or we have to improve it. So I think we don't see some of that. It's there, and that has to be part of our tools that we consider in addition to the absolutely right goal of permanent supportive housing. But in the interim, what do we do in terms of infrastructure? What do we do in terms of making some of the housing arrangements that people have made safer?
Are there some of those more interim sort of solutions that the city and county could or should be supporting funding right now? Here's your opportunity to tell these two. Get them to do it.
I mean, I do think, you know, when I love hearing all the numbers about 10,000 permanent supportive houses. And I think that's the kind of thing that gets people galvanized to vote for a proposition. And that's wonderful. But I would like to see storage for homeless. I'd like to see more toilets. I'd like to see access to things that are a little more difficult to stand behind but are necessary. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see those things happen.
So
I would like to see someone being clear about those numbers, and those are part of what's put out, that this is what we're doing in terms of access to folks who are not in the first 10,000 that get the permanent supportive housing. I would like to see, we are making tremendous progress led by the state and the city and the county on working with accessory dwelling units.
Right.
I would like to see money targeted for improving existing accessory dwelling units. In a way, I would like to see it targeted in a way that recognizes this could take 3 years, 10 years to upgrade. But here's the money, we will allow you to invest in it, and you will have time to improve it. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see some of those strategies in addition to what's being done.
Fair enough. Phil?
Well, yeah, 2 points. First, I want to mention one strategy, safe parking, which we are very much embracing. The Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority released in the last few days a request for proposals where we've been able to identify about 10 Los Angeles County parking lots. These are either freestanding parking lots or, in most cases, Los Angeles County parking lots where there's a county office or other form of county facility that's used in the daytime. And we're making those available at no cost to the operator and providing funding for services. And those sites alone will roughly double the size of the safe parking program in Los Angeles County and will result in the largest safe parking program in the United States. And as I mentioned—
Can I get a pause? I'm sorry, safe parking. What do you mean by safe?
Safe parking means a parking lot where a person who lives in their car, van, or RV can sleep safely at night, where there is security and they won't be bothered, and there's a porta potty or other restroom facility and hand washing, and typically overnight. So I think that's a very important and promising strategy, particularly in a community where over half of our unsheltered homeless population is living in vehicles. I also wanted to just piggyback on the point about permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is the solution for the subset of people experiencing homelessness who need an ongoing rental subsidy and ongoing services. Basically, people that are typically are defined as chronically homeless. But most people experiencing homelessness don't need permanent supportive housing. They need affordable housing that they can pay for. And we have a shortage of in the neighborhood of 15,000 units of permanent supportive housing in LA County. We have the ability to build our way out of that shortage with public subsidies between Proposition Triple H and No Place Like Home, which will bring $700 million over the next few years to Los Angeles County for permanent supportive housing for people with mental illness, and Los Angeles County's own Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We can build that number of units, but we cannot publicly subsidize a gap of 560,000 affordable housing units. We can only get at that number by making the housing market work in a way that generates those units through accessory dwelling units, through inclusionary zoning, through other means that result in cities that control 90% of the land use policy in this county, approving the construction of more housing, affordable housing, and market rate housing. So I just wanted to put that in context because the vast majority of people who are homeless will not move into housing that is newly built specifically for people experiencing homelessness. The vast majority of people who are homeless will move into already existing housing, either affordable housing or naturally occurring affordable housing.
And just to echo that, I mean, I think what the city is doing and what the county is doing is taking an all of the above approach strategy here. I mean, it's not just going to be Triple H, it's not just going to be permanent supportive housing, although we just, launched a really large campaign around permanent supportive housing a couple years ago to get our $1.2 billion bond passed, known as Prop HHH, which is to create 10,000 units of supportive housing over the course of 10 years, because there was a lot of people didn't really understand what supportive housing was and what the goal of it really was to do. And so we did, launch this huge awareness campaign on this is what supportive housing is. These are the folks who move into it. They stay there, often forever because they have a chronic disability and they're going to need intensive services forever. That was a really big kind of educational awareness campaign, but it wasn't meant to say that that's the only solution for people who are experiencing homelessness, because if it was, we would certainly have a math problem on our hands if we're only building 10,000 over the course of 10 years when we have 52,000 people on any given night experiencing homelessness in the county. So Triple H has been an amazing program. It has certainly taken the pipeline of supportive housing, which already existed in the city, which the city was always creating about 300 units per year of supportive housing. What it really has aimed to do is to more than triple the production of supportive housing in the city, up to 1,000 units per year. I think that's just an important distinction. I know sometimes we hear about Triple H is going to be short on its unit goal, but the idea was never for that subsidy or that bond to fully fund 10,000 units. I think that's an important point. But also to Phil's point, I mean, we need to ensure, and what the city is doing to do that, we need to ensure affordability. We need to ensure that not only do we create and produce more affordable housing, but we also preserve and protect the affordable housing that we have. So a couple different ways the city is creating more affordable housing is through the linkage fee, which is a fee that is passed on to developers that, well, they really have a choice. They can either build affordable housing into their projects that they're proposing, or they can pay a fee, and that fee goes into the affordable housing loan fund, which then is used to create more affordable housing. The linkage fee is expected to create somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $100 million per year in revenue. I think we're seeing that revenue early looks at that is it's coming in a little lower than we had expected, but that means that developers are actually including the units in their buildings, which is a really good thing. I mean, it's good to have mixed income housing. That's really a good thing for everyone. And then we also have the Transit-Oriented Community Program, or the TOC, and this is about building at a higher density and building affordable housing around major transit systems in the city. So we have a lot of sprawl in LA, and we want to build thoughtfully, and we also want want to increase public transit mobility. And so giving developers bonuses to build more around public transit and to build in affordability is also a smart way that we're kind of rethinking what LA could and should look like. And just as an update on the TOC program to date, there's about 13,000 units that are proposed under that program, with 2,400 of them being affordable housing units.
That's a good segue into what was one of my last questions to ask you before we turn it over to all of you, which is the Senate Bill 50 that's being debated up in Sacramento, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. For those of you who are not, essentially it would give the state the ability to override local zoning rules in order to encourage faster development of housing, including affordable housing around bus and rail and I think ferry stops and other things. I've heard that debated mostly in the context of climate change and public transportation, but and also affordable housing. A lot of opposition to this from homeowner groups and some community groups. I wonder if you all could talk about that a little bit in terms of its potential effect on homelessness, and whether you see this as desirable or not to have the state take this kind of role in it, or whether it would be best, particularly in Los Angeles, for the city and county to be enacting and enforcing its own zoning rules. Phil, you want to start with that, or Christina, either of you?
Well, I'll let Christina go first. Los Angeles City has land use authority for about 4 times as many people as Los Angeles County.
Very good. Christina.
I'll just say from the mayor's office, we definitely think the spirit of the bill and the concept of the bill of creating, just really kind of doing a bold undertaking of really changing what the local land use policies are to create density. Especially that would especially impact places like Los Angeles County, which again there's a lot of zoning for single family homes, right? So we do think that the concept is good. There are a few amendments in which we are openly talking to this, to Senator Wiener's office about.
Conceptually, it's sort of, I'm sorry to interrupt, but conceptually it kind of looks like the state doing what the city's already doing, no?
Exactly, and I think part of that is we do want to also protect what we've done locally. And when I say protect, I mean the transit-oriented community measure was really important, and we've seen tremendous success with it so far. We certainly wouldn't want to see what we're doing with TOCs undermined by SB 50. And I think anytime a state comes in with a policy like SB 50, you do get into this tension of local control versus state control. It's hard for local jurisdiction to kind of give that up, but we think we're actually on the right track and could be a model for other cities across the state on how to improve density, how to think about creating more housing, because it's undoubtedly we are in a housing crisis and we need more supply.
Am I right to read between the lines of your remark that the mayor does not have a position yet on the bill, or does he?
Again, we support the spirit and the concept of the bill. We're actively working with Sacramento on getting it to a place in which we can openly, we would openly take a stand on that.
I appreciate it.
And what I'll say is that not specifically in SB 50, but more broadly relative to the economic issues that we've talked about today and their centrality around particularly preventing the inflow into homelessness, that these are issues where the state of California is uniquely positioned to take action on policy. And with the active engagement and unprecedented engagement by Governor Newsom, there's legislation being seriously discussed in Sacramento that would really have an impact. And I'll just mention a couple of things there. Our county is sponsoring SB 329 by Senator Holly Mitchell that would prohibit landlords from discriminating against prospective tenants who have a rental subsidy, either a federally funded subsidy, Section 8 subsidy, or a local subsidy such as through Measure H, where today landlords who have units that fall within the rental guidelines that would be covered by a subsidy can nonetheless refuse to rent to people who have those subsidies. The bill we're sponsoring that's being carried by Senator Mitchell would would prohibit that. That only the localities can adopt that, such a provision. We have 88 cities in Los Angeles County plus the unincorporated areas, so we are really dependent on a state level solution. Similarly, the Assembly Housing Committee just last week adopted AB 1482 by Assemblyman Chu, an anti-rent gouging bill, which would establish a relatively high cap on rent increases, which would not supersede any local rent stabilization ordinances, but which would put an upper ceiling on rent increases similar to what the state of Oregon did. And there's a companion bill, AB 1481 by Assemblyman Bonta, that would require that anywhere in California, evictions only be for just cause. In Los Angeles County, both the City of Los Angeles and the Board of Supervisors for the unincorporated areas have in place just cause eviction ordinances, but most of the other 87 cities do not. This sort of action from the state of California to try to prevent evictions, limit rent increases, and increase the supply of affordable housing are fundamental to a broader effort to reduce the flow of families and individuals into homelessness.
My normative position is to prefer that most of these decisions are made at the local level, land use decisions particularly. State level intervention in several other conservative states has been to stop no inclusionary zoning, no rent stabilization. So it could be, we're fortunate to have a progressive legislature, and these are welcome legislations that are happening. In terms of land supply or land use, I think the couple of the best things that seem to have happened are transit-oriented communities and ADUs in some ways. ADUs was top-down from the state. We've been talking about here for a long time in this city and across the county. And it would have been difficult to do because I think any city that would have done it or the county would have had to go through CEQA, and it would have been difficult to upzone. Because of the state intervention, it takes away the necessity to do that, and it's worked out. I think it's the same with transit-oriented communities. Because it was a proposition, we didn't have to have CEQA. So here we have a context in which CEQA constrains significantly the ability of local governments to upzone without getting into legal problems. Unless CEQA is loosened to allow local governments ability to do upzoning, I think the alternative is either these are propositions or it's the state government, and it's not going to happen from local legislative efforts.
All right, well, with that, I do want to leave some time for questions from all of you. One admonition or request would be to please ask an actual question. I know it's tempting when you have folks like this up here to make a speech, but if you do me the favor and confine it to a question, I'd appreciate it. Why don't you start? Yeah, looks like you have one, yeah. And you can use the microphone, yeah.
Hi, I'm Earl Weber. I'm a film producer based here in LA. My question for all three of you, and you can all answer it if you like, how do you define sustainability? And then the next part of this question is, when it comes to the issue of homelessness, because it is such a far-reaching effort both on the state and national level, how can we as a city and as a state redefine sustainability when it comes to homelessness so that it can be feasibly done fiscally without drawing the ire of taxpayers?
I'm going to ask you a clarifying question. When you say sustainability, can you share a little more about what you mean? Like, how do we build a sustainable system that responds to people who are homeless quickly and rehouses them and keeps them housed, or do you mean something else?
So right now I'm working in an exploratory committee for my own political campaign. And one of the things that I did to define all the programming that I'm putting together in my platform is, when it comes to sustainability, what's important for me is many people would like to define define a good program or the mark of a good program as one that how many people can we get onto the program? And I want to ask others, wouldn't it be better to redefine good programming as how quickly can we get people off the program and how many people can we get off the program? Solving the issue of homelessness, I believe, is one of those things where it's not enough to just get people in housing, and it's not just enough to get people above the poverty line. It's also incredibly important to get those homeless people to be thriving and to put mechanisms in place so that people who are one check away from becoming homeless to not fall into homelessness. So that's how I define it, but I'd love to hear what are your thoughts when it comes to the fiscal sustainability of making it happen.
Yeah.
52 to 58,000, the numbers are all different with everybody I ask.
Yeah, so I would say for a large subset of our homeless service programs, that is absolutely the goal. The goal is never to have someone remain on a program in perpetuity. Now, there are people who need support for the rest of their lives because they have a chronic, severe and persistent disability that is not going to necessarily, they're not going to recover to a point where they're never going to need a housing subsidy or they're never going to need supportive services to stay housed. And that's, again, the population when we think about our chronically homeless adult population or folks who have been on the streets a long time or just have chronic issues. They're going to need help forever. But most of our other programs really are geared to providing short-term assistance. Rapid rehousing is sort of our shallow or our medium-term rental assistance program, which that's the entire goal. The entire goal is to help someone come off the streets quickly, give them a little bit of a subsidy in a market rate apartment, and work them off that subsidy. And whether that's through obtaining, benefits through some other public benefit source, but more importantly, something like employment. So they have services that are focused on how to get people back into the job market so they can be self-sustaining and can, live fruitful and productive lives. And I think really giving people a purpose and making sure people can hone in on what their purpose is and have just meaningful activities every day is definitely the goal so people can thrive and be connected to the community. Phil, I don't know if you want any more to say about them.
Okay, you take it.
Well, I'll say a word about sustainability relative to the countywide movement to prevent and combat homelessness. When the Board of Supervisors launched the Homeless Initiative in August of 2015, we proceeded based on two key premises. One, this is not a crisis that the county could effectively address on its own. And secondly, that mainstream county systems, health, social services, and criminal justice have a fundamental role to play. And out of that, over the last several years, as reflected in the voter support, first for Proposition Triple H in November 2016, and then Measure H in March of 2017, what we've seen is a true movement that has emerged across this county to prevent and combat homelessness, where we have hundreds of organizations and thousands of people who are involved in a full-time basis as part of this movement, and hundreds of thousands of other Los Angeles County residents who care very deeply about bringing our homeless neighbors home and are in some way contributing to that, many through the United Way-led Everyone In campaign, which mobilizes community support for the construction, for the siting of interim, affordable, and supportive housing. So when I think about sustainability, what I think about is how do we build on the social ecology of Los Angeles County, the fabric of organizations and neighborhoods and individuals, of government, philanthropy, the nonprofit sector, and faith organizations. And what we have built here in Los Angeles County is a movement that is sustainable because it draws on the passion and the compassion of people across this county. I often share a quote from the Buddha, who said that a single candle can light 1,000 others without diminishing itself. And what I find as the director of the Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative is that every single day, people whose candles were not lit yesterday are lit today, and that tomorrow they'll light someone else's candles. And this is a burgeoning movement, not only as more and more individuals and organizations become involved, but it's qualitatively burgeoning as well as new ideas and innovations take hold. There's a great expression, none of us are as smart as all of us. And this is truly a movement that is expanding throughout Los Angeles County, which will be sustainable over the long haul.
Next.
Hi, my name is Idalia Santos. I work for a developer, and I'm also part of 7 nonprofits, one of them being St. Vincent de Paul. I see most Catholic charities do more outreach than the city and local government. And I don't know if you're gonna have what the plan is. I know that right now, the $1.2 billion, it's held up in courts and they might release it in the fall. Do you know if they have a particular plan of what agencies it's gonna go to? And secondly, if, like, I belong to St. Vincent de Paul Society, if it's going to be, if we're gonna get a plan of how the money is gonna be distributed, and is there a developer on your team to help you do the math? I built 55 units of affordable housing. It costs $55 million. If you have a developer on your side and do the math correctly, you can get out of your hole in 3 or 4 years.
Thank you. So again, to clarify, are you talking about the $1.2 billion Triple H bond? Are you saying that's held up in court?
Yes, that's helped in court according to the LA Times March 28th, 2019 article.
So the bond monies itself is not held up in court. What is held up in court is the permanent supportive housing ordinance, which was the accompanying ordinance that we passed when we passed Triple H, which was meant to cut the pre-development time down from 3 to 5 years down to 1 to 2 years, because we know it takes time to build, to build units. So Triple H is hot and humming. I know we have not seen any grand openings yet, but if you want to go to hcidla.org or hcidla.org, you can actually see the Triple H dashboard, and it'll tell you there are 79 projects that are in the pipeline right now, funded in part by a Triple H subsidy. But as I mentioned before, we're always talking about more than tripling our pipeline. So that's the 79 Triple H projects. We actually have 107 supportive housing projects in the pipeline right now. There's 11 under construction, and we're going to open our first project this fall, which we're really, really excited about. And then there was also a Triple H facilities portion to the Triple H program, which was to rehab or open up new interim housing. And the first, it's LA Family Housing, it's the campus where it's an access center. The first Triple H funded facilities program will be opening up in May. So I know it's hard to feel the effects of Triple H just yet because there's no one inside with their head on a pillow, but I promise you the city is doing everything in its power to get those units out quickly, despite not having the PSH ordinance as a tool to expedite the pre-development time period.
Will you advise of your plan? Like, for instance, I'm part of St. Vincent de Paul, and I get the phone calls from a homeless lady living in her car. I, with another member, go and assess her situation, and then we're sitting on donation money and we help accordingly. But we can only Band-Aid. We could give them a gift card, a gas card, and that's it. We don't have referrals. 2-in-1 is like a dead zone. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so Phil is chomping at the bit for the mic here. I think he's going to want to talk about LA Hop, if I had to guess.
Yeah, indeed, thank you. Yeah, so first on the overall picture from the Measure H side, it's estimated $355 million for 21 strategies. A 50-member stakeholder process developed the plan for including representatives from philanthropy, homeless service providers, cities, people with lived experience, and county departments for how to deploy that funding across shelter, outreach, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, disability benefits advocacy, prevention, and other key strategies. The vast majority of that $355 million a year goes out in contracts to community-based providers, and all of the details about that are on our website, homeless.lacounty.gov, where, among other things, we have a detailed chart that identifies not only how much funding has been allocated to and spent in each of the strategies, but also the names and funding amounts for each of the community-based contractors throughout the county. On the specific issue of a family or youth or adult in need, as Christina mentioned, I want to mention LA HOP, which is the LA Homeless Outreach Portal, lahop.org, which is a first of its kind web-based portal that anyone in Los Angeles County, a resident, a first responder, a city employee, a business, a faith organization, anyone can use 24 hours a day to request a response from a homeless outreach worker. And by putting in the address and any other known information about the person or persons who are homeless at a given location, then that homeless outreach request is automatically routed to the outreach coordinator for one of the 8 geographic regions in the county, who in turn assigns that outreach request to one of the more than 100 outreach teams. There are nearly 800 full-time homeless outreach workers in Los Angeles County, about half of whom are funded by Measure H.
Can I ask a question for either Christina or Phil or both? If I'm a homeless person and I am in need of help, what is the best thing for me to do? I mean, right now, if I'm in the street right now and I need a place to stay tonight, what should I do?
You should call 211 and find out where there is interim housing near you. But I want to be straightforward about that we have a lot more people on the street than we have interim housing beds.
So the likelihood is I would not get a bed.
There's a good chance that one day to the next, you would not be able to locate a vacant bed as a single adult. If you are a family with minor children, our current system commitment is to do everything we can to prevent children from being on the streets.
One more question from the audience. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Tim McDaniel. I'm CEO and creator of Section 8 Managers. And we pretty much created a platform to help streamline the housing placement process. And my question is a couple of questions, actually. So we noticed that like programs like rapid rehousing that only funds 3 to 6 months, sometimes 9, oftentimes they end up falling back into the same situation before the subsidy started. And I know some agencies have been creative, at least initially. I don't know if it's still, still something that's I've seen. I haven't seen it done recently. But before they go into that program, I was just wondering if there's a possibility that they can keep their eligibility for subsidies after the rapid rehousing ends. If there's any ideas on how to do that. Because I know different agencies does their rapid rehousing program differently, and the ones that does it well, I noticed that they actually prepare for that. So after their subsidy ends with rapid rehousing that they have, so I was just wondering if there's any, comprehensive plan for that. And then my second question is about the public housing authorities and their involvement in the solution. So one of the challenges we also have is that, we actually do have vacant units, oddly, and we can't find a Section 8 family. And so, sometimes we have to go to the housing authority and say, where's the families? And they say, hey, the agencies are supposed to, assist the clients in identifying the housing opportunities. And so for me, that kind of sounds like they're just passing off the burden, on all the agencies. And I feel like they're in a prime position to be a part of the solution. And so what can they do to be a part of it?
Okay, I'll try to provide a quick response to both questions. So for the rapid rehousing that we fund through Measure H, which is the bulk of the rapid rehousing in LA County, the time limit is 6 to 24 months. It's not 3 to 6 months under any of the programs that we're funding. And I don't believe that's the timeline for any rapid rehousing programs in the county. One of the there's 2 key challenges in rapid rehousing in LA County. One is finding housing that people can get into where the rent is low enough, either shared housing or independent housing, that the rental subsidy will cover. And then secondly is helping people increase their income enough to sustain the housing at the end of the rapid rehousing period. We are poised to implement a shallow subsidy program, which for a certain subset of people in rapid rehousing will provide a $300 to $500 a month long-term rental subsidy without associated services, just a shallow rent subsidy to try to bridge that gap. Because oftentimes people in rapid rehousing might succeed in securing employment or increasing their income, but it's still not enough to pay 100% of the rent. On the second issue, the public housing authorities are playing a critical role in this movement. There are 18 housing authorities in LA County. The two largest are the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles and the Housing Authority of the County of Los Angeles. In the county, we're committing 50% of all of our Section 8 vouchers that turn over through routine attrition each year to permanent supportive housing, to the people who are most in need in this community of a long-term rental subsidy. The Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles is putting up Section 8 vouchers to pay for the operating costs in those new HHH units that are being built that Christina mentioned, as well as the other units being built by the City of Los Angeles. We have, through the Homeless Initiative, we bring together representatives of most of the housing authorities in Los Angeles County to try to standardize their efforts and coordinate around homelessness. And in particular, under one of our strategies, Strategy B4, we provide funding to all of the housing authorities in the county who are willing to commit Section 8 vouchers for permanent supportive housing to pay for landlord incentives. Because oftentimes landlords, as I mentioned earlier, are either unwilling or reticent to accept a Section 8 voucher. So we're using Measure H funding for the housing authorities to pay to keep a unit vacant for a month while a landlord finds a Section 8 client or Veterans Administration supportive housing client that they are willing to rent to. And on the back end, we pay for damage mitigation so that if there's damage caused to a unit that's in excess of the security deposit, we use our funding as essentially as a guarantee against that damage for the landlord. And that's been very successful. That's called the Homeless Incentive Program.
And Tim, just to clear, I guess I need a lot of clarifiers on questions tonight. Did you say that you had a unit that was open and you were looking for the family to fill it? Or was it the other way?
Yeah, so at any given time, we have about 5 to 10, vacant units, and we're like waiting for agencies to refer, families to us.
And so that is, that we absolutely never want that to be the case. We can't have that happen. There's a program I do want to plug. PATH, or People Assisting the Homeless, have created a web-based platform called Lease Up, and it's a website where if you are a property owner, if you are a landlord or property management company, and you have units and you want to match them with people who have either a subsidy, they'll do this sort of matchmaking for you because they definitely have the tenants, and if you have the units, they can provide that support. It's something new that they launched, I think, just last October, and they've had some tremendous success already.
Not to belabor the point. So we actually did that as well.
That is belaboring. That's right.
I'm sorry. But thank you. Thank you for the info.
Well, I was sorry to cut you off. I was only kidding. I really did want to say a couple of really quick things. First of all, several of you, including you, sir, I called on several times. I don't want to have the microphone go elsewhere. If you have questions, I'm sure our panelists will be around for a few more minutes. Please feel free to approach them afterward. Quick word here, Cross Campus, which hosted this evening and has hosted a number of Blueprint events. Just wanted to extend our thanks there. This is a co-working space with offices. So if any of you are interested, you can get information at the front desk here. Finally, before we go, I want to say a special thanks to Liz Kivowitz, Boatwright Simon, who's sitting over there. Anything that you liked about this evening is because she made it happen, and so we appreciate it. With that, I want to thank you all very much for coming, and I want to extend a special thanks to our panelists. These are people who dedicate their lives to working on this incredibly important and moving and tragic problem, and so we owe them all a debt of thanks. I appreciate it very much.